All right, so we're going to dive into QAnon. And honestly, going through all this stuff you sent me, it's kind of scary. Like,
Yeah.
how does something, that starts out like so fringe end up having, I don't know, so much influence in the real world?
It is really fascinating how this, movement that started really online has had such a big impact on,
Yeah.
families, politics,
Yeah.
and even violence, right?
Yeah, we've got like news reports from CBS, the BBC, MSNBC, Al Jazeera. We've got like deep dives from Vice and The Daily Show. We even have a testimony from a game designer. And it all comes down to this idea of like there's this cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles that are running the U.S. government. And that, like, Donald Trump is this lone warrior who's fighting back against them. It sounds like something out of a bad movie, honestly.
Yeah, it does sound like almost like a movie plot or something. But it really taps into, I think, a very long history that we have of these kinds of conspiracy theories that, they prey on people's fears, about powerful figures, hidden agendas. And it packages all this fear into this very simplistic narrative of good versus evil.
Yeah.
And it's very seductive, especially when we live in a world that feels so uncertain, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that it started online. One of the sources talked about 4chan, which is, for people who don't know, it's this online message board, and it's known for being kind of a wild place. And that's where Q, the mysterious figure behind this, first started posting, right?
That's right, yeah. So back in 2017, these posts, which are called Q drops, they started appearing on 4chan. And they were filled with this really strange coded language and these cryptic clues that followers believe reveal a hidden truth about the world.
Okay.
And what's interesting is Q claims to have this high-level security clearance, which only added to this mystery and intrigue.
So people are spending all this time, I mean, from what I'm reading, they're spending hours trying to decode these messages. What are some of the things that they think they've figured out? I was reading about celebrities drinking children's blood for immortality. Like Hillary Clinton being worse than a pedophile, and even Michelle Obama being a man?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of those kinds of claims circulating out there, about celebrities, politicians, all sorts of things. And, they might sound ridiculous on the surface, but they actually do tap into some existing anxieties and cultural narratives that we have. So, for example, the idea of powerful elites engaging in dark rituals has been around for centuries. It's not something new. It really plays on our fear of the unknown, our distrust of those in power, and, even our fascination with the occult.
So it's not just about the claims themselves, it's about the underlying anxieties that they exploit?
Exactly, yeah. So QAnon is providing this framework for understanding the world. It's giving people a way to make sense of complex events. It's telling you who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and what's really going on behind the scenes. And so for people who feel lost or disillusioned or powerless, it's a very, very appealing narrative.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the sources that stood out to me was the game designer. He had this really interesting perspective because he talked about how games can be designed to exploit these psychological vulnerabilities. He talked about this concept of apophenia, which is basically seeing patterns where none exist, and how we get this dopamine rush from solving puzzles, even if they're, not real puzzles. And he suggested that QAnon is kind of like a giant unsolvable puzzle.
Yeah, and there's no real solution. So the game never ends.
Yeah.
And people are constantly searching for the next piece. They're decoding these Q drops. They're feeling like they're on the verge of uncovering this huge conspiracy.
It's like an addiction almost.
Yeah, exactly. It's very addictive.
Yeah. But it's also dangerous, right? I mean, one of the things that I keep seeing over and over again is how QAnon has led to violence. The FBI even labeled it a domestic terrorism threat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just harmless online chatter. It's important to remember that. These beliefs have been linked to several violent incidents, including, I think one of the most well-known ones, is the Pizzagate shooting, where a man fired an assault rifle inside a pizza place in D.C. because he believed it was a front for a child sex trafficking ring.
And it's not just those isolated incidents either, right? I mean, it feels like QAnon is becoming more mainstream.
It's definitely becoming more organized. Yeah. It's more mainstream and potentially even more dangerous because of that.
So how did we get here? How did we go from these cryptic messages on a message board to this political force with real-world consequences?
Yeah.
And what role did social media play in all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where things get even more interesting and perhaps even more discarding. So we can explore that in the next part. Social media has been, I think, like gasoline on a fire when it comes to QAnon.
Yeah, I can see that. But don't you think that it's kind of, I don't know, too simple to just blame the tech companies? I mean, people have a responsibility to think critically about the information they consume, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's definitely not that simple. Social media companies definitely do bear some responsibility. But it's also about the users and the vulnerabilities of those users and how these platforms can be used to exploit those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, one of the articles that I was reading described it as this rabbit hole effect. Like, you click on a link, it seems harmless enough. Maybe it's about, I don't know, saving children or something like that. And then all of a sudden, you're being bombarded with this QAnon content. You're being told that JFK Jr. is still alive and about to become Trump's vice president.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really is like falling down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Only you're not in Wonderland. Right. You're in this bizarre alternate reality.
And once you're down there, it seems like it's really hard to get out.
It is, yeah.
Why is that?
So I think part of it has to do with how these platforms are designed. They're designed to keep you engaged. And a lot of times that means feeding you content that confirms your existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are, not really based in reality.
So the more you engage with QAnon content, the more the algorithm shows you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
A lot of the sources that I was looking at pointed to Facebook in particular as playing a pretty significant role.
Facebook played a huge role
in the spread of QAnon.
For sure.
They talked about these Facebook groups.
Yeah, they created these echo chambers.
Where QAnon followers could gather and just share their beliefs.
Yeah, and reinforce each other's convictions, right?
Because a lot of these groups are private or hidden.
Right, exactly.
They fly under the radar.
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, then there was the whole #SaveTheChildren thing, which, on the surface, it sounds like a good thing, right? Saving children. But QAnon was able to use that.
Yeah, they hijacked it.
To spread their narrative.
It's a very clever tactic.
Yeah.
Albeit, pretty cynical. They were able to tap into people's empathy.
Yeah.
Our natural desire to protect children. And because they were able to frame it in terms of this, righteous cause of saving children.
Yeah.
They were able to spread their propaganda really effectively.
Yeah, and it's scary how easily these movements can exploit legitimate concerns like that.
It is. And it speaks to the need for us to be more media literate. We need to be aware of the tactics that are being used to manipulate us.
So it sounds like the social media companies have a lot to answer for. But you said earlier that it's not just about them, it's also about individual responsibility. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, even with the best algorithms, even with the best content moderation policies, these platforms can still be used to spread misinformation and manipulate people. Ultimately, it comes down to each individual's ability to think critically.
The game designer talked about that too, about media literacy and teaching people how to recognize propaganda.
We need to equip people with the tools that they need to navigate the digital world, to be able to tell the difference between what's real and what's not.
It's a pretty big challenge, though. I mean, QAnon seems to be constantly evolving, adapting its tactics.
Like whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
You take down one account, another one pops up. You debunk one conspiracy theory, two more appear in its place.
And then they're telling their followers to stop using the obvious keywords, the labels.
Like the code words.
Yeah, so that they don't get flagged by the algorithm.
They're going undercover.
It's like they're going underground.
Yeah, they're trying to blend in.
So what can we do? I mean, is there any hope of stopping this?
That's the question that keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are things we can do, both as individuals and as a society, to push back against this and reclaim our shared reality.
So where do we go from here? We've spent all this time diving into QAnon, its origins, its spread, the dangers it poses. What now? Can we actually do anything to combat this?
Well, it's a question, isn't it? And it's a tough one. I mean, looking at these sources, they don't exactly paint an optimistic picture. One expert even compares QAnon to a hydra. You cut off one head, two more grow back.
Yeah, and it feels like it's constantly finding new ways to exploit people.
It is. It's constantly adapting. It's rebranding.
Yeah.
Finding new ways to tap into our fears and anxieties.
And social media, I mean, that's clearly played a huge role in allowing this to spread. It's like these echo chambers.
Yeah.
Where these conspiracy theories can just flourish.
Right. And the algorithms.
Yeah.
They just keep feeding you more of what you already believe.
Yeah.
Even if it's completely detached from reality.
So how do you fight something like that? One of the sources talked about the need for a vaccine for misinformation. But how do you vaccinate someone against something that's not just about facts, but about emotions, you know?
Yeah, that's the real challenge, isn't it? You can't just debunk a few claims and expect that to be enough. You have to address those underlying vulnerabilities, the anxieties, the desires, the things that make people susceptible to these kinds of narratives in the first place.
So is it about critical thinking then? Media literacy?
It's a big part of it, for sure. We need to teach people how to evaluate information, how to recognize bias, how to think for themselves. But it's also about emotional resilience, helping people develop that healthy skepticism so they're not so easily manipulated.
One thing that really struck me while I was reading all this stuff was a sense of community that QAnon provides.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
People feel like they belong.
Absolutely.
They found their tribe.
And that's something we have to acknowledge. That need for belonging is a very human need. And if we want to combat the appeal of these groups, we need to find ways to create spaces where people feel connected, where they feel heard, where they feel valued.
So it's not just about fighting misinformation. It's about building a better world, really.
I think so, yeah. It's about addressing those root causes, the things that make people vulnerable to these kinds of narratives. It's about building a world where people feel seen, where they feel empowered, where critical thinking and compassion are valued.
That's a pretty tall order.
It is. It's a long road.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fight worth having.
Well, this deep dive has been quite a journey. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I think that's true of any deep dive, really. There's always more to explore.
But it's definitely been eye-opening.
It has. It's a reminder of the challenges we face, but also the opportunities.
And that we're not powerless.
That
we can make a difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the truth is out there, but sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to find it.